Spontaneous DAWLESS jams can be a lot of fun. But if you ever want to record what you are playing, either to share online, release, or for your own musical archive, then you'll need a mixer of some kind with recording capability. I've been using the Tascam Model 12 to do just that for the past 3 years in my DAWLESS setup, and all the tracks that you hear on my latest album have gone through this mixer/recorder. While you could of course accomplish the same with an audio interface that has the same number of inputs and record directly to your DAW, I'm going to make the case that recording direct to mixer can be a whole lot more fun. I've shown my entire DAWLESS workflow in a previous video, so check that out after you watch this if you haven't done so already. Today we'll be looking at the Model 12 as an integral part of a DAWLESS setup, and how you can use it to keep churning out songs on a regular basis. So we've got 6 mono inputs and 2 stereo inputs up on top. And you may already be wondering why it's called the Model 12 when you get to record only 10 tracks. That's because with each recording you also get a master mixdown as tracks 11 and 12 free of charge. So let's take a look at how I've got everything set up in my process. I've got my bass coming from the digitone in mono on track 1. Track 2 is used by the microphone or a sampler. Tracks 3 and 4 are the left and right channels for drums coming from the TR6S. Tracks 5 and 6 are the left and right channels coming from the Dreadbox Typhon. I initially thought of having the Typhon go to a single mono channel, but its internal effects are so good it would be a shame and a waste not hearing them in stereo. Track 7/8, which is a stereo track, is the master out of the digitone after it travels through the Digitech Polara. And track 9/10 is my guitar after getting pumped up by the Boss GX100. When you're connecting your setup to the Model 12, be sure to think about gain staging and avoid clipping the signal of each track, unless you're going for some intentional digital clipping harshness, in which case knock yourself out. I like having all my instruments coming out on max volume by default, and I'll sometimes use the knobs to slowly introduce them as I'm recording. So I set my track faders to 0 and tweak these gain knobs on the mixer until I'm measuring 85 decibels at the position where I'm sitting. Now, I'm not super precise about it, I just use a simple smartphone app to get in the ballpark. But I am always conscious about keeping the master volume that's coming from the monitors below a level that will induce permanent hearing damage. Now, moving down the signal chain, I don't use the low cut filter as I like to handle that in the mix using different cutoff frequencies, slopes, or even using a shelf filter instead of a cut. The single knob compressor and the EQ section are deceptively usable on this thing. I use them all the time if something is poking my ear that I can't fix on the instrument side. If you want to include their processing in your multi-track recordings, you can select the recording position as pre-compressor, post-compressor, or post-EQ per track. Continuing right along, we get to the effect section, but we'll get to that later. Now, talking about the outputs, there's XLR stereo main output and TRS stereo output. But what's particularly interesting here is the submix output. So you can send any of the tracks to the main and or the submix and control each of them through these faders. Now, there are different ways how you can use the submix option. But here's what I like to do when I use a sampler in my setup. I'll have the submix output going to the audio in of the sampler, where I would record the incoming sounds. So whatever is being sent to the submix is getting sampled and mangled further in the sampler. I used to use the Polyend tracker to do just that before I sold it, but once I get the Roland SP404 Mark II, I think I'll integrate it in the same way into my process. The way that I approach recording my songs is that I'll compose everything on the digitone first and have the sequence running in song mode as I play the guitar on top while everything is being recorded. I love this approach because it adds an element of performance to an otherwise robotic process of programmed sequences. And besides, I still haven't figured out a simple way to sequence the guitar. This means that I get my mix sounding as good as I can on the instruments themselves, but I don't shy away from using the onboard EQ and compressor when needed, in tandem with the master EQ option, just so I can roughly simulate what the final mix might sound like. Once I've got the full song recorded, I'll give it another listen and take note of any areas for improvement or further development. Maybe on some parts my performance was off, or I was too busy playing with the guitar when I would have perhaps liked to fiddle with some sound design. Or I'm simply listening to it with fresh ears as the song is completed and I'm coming up with ideas for new parts. In that case, I'll bring up that section on my master sequencer, which is the digitone, and just replay that section and record that part at the end of the song on the Model 12. So that way I can have multiple takes to choose from, or in the case of the guitar, I'll have a couple of takes to choose from for double tracking, triple tracking, or quadruple tracking. Now this would also be a good opportunity to record certain parts without the effects. The way I approach this is I'm composing and recording everything with full effects. So I've got phasers, chorus, flangers, delay, reverb, everything is getting recorded on the multitrack. But if I was looking to elevate the quality of my final mix to the next level, I would simply start recording everything dry, and then I would apply the effects when I'm mixing in the DAW. That's not really a goal of mine at the moment, but I'm just putting out this information in case it might be useful for someone else. A cool thing you can do in that case is to apply the effects on the mixer itself by sending a portion of the signal from each channel to the master effects. That way you'll hear the effects on the master out, but they won't be included in the multi-track recording. Let's finish this up with a couple of more tasty bonus tips. When I'm recording additional parts, I'm writing down the timestamps for each section and what the goal of the recording is. Maybe it's an additional guitar part, a drum loop variation, different effects and risers, you get it. But if I had a microphone, which I do, and a free mixer input, which I currently do, then I could simply make comments along the way as I'm recording. Another cool feature worth mentioning on the Model 12 is Bluetooth. So what I like to do is send my phone signal by Bluetooth to channel 10 and record that. And then I'll use the vamp feature to loop a section of the recording that I'd like to practice over. You don't have to be surgically precise with placing the in and out points, because the mixer will automatically calculate the BPM and the most convenient loop points. As you can tell, this mixer has a tiny screen. Now, having been blessed with this DAWLESS curse, I've dealt with plenty of small screens along the years, but frankly most of them have been implemented very well and do not significantly impair the user experience or break the flow. This is not the case with the Model 12. The clicky jog wheel, the menu structure and lack of additional controls make this thing barely usable in my most humble opinion. And that's my biggest and perhaps only real issue with this mixer/recorder. But if you still have doubts about this mixer, then let me know in the comments and let me know what other gear for my setup I can do a video on next. If you're interested in learning more about DAWLESS music production, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. And check out my previous video where I showcase my entire setup for a deeper dive into my DAWLESS workflow.